Thank you for coming. I'm, as you can see, I'm two-sided. I'm Tim Broyd. It was my honour, very much my pleasure last year to be president of the ICE. As some of you will know, it's good to see a number of, certainly to me, new faces. You can get too much into a rut of holding a number of events but having pretty much the same people turn up to them, and so do you ever find any new ideas on that? Well, probably for the first couple of sessions. But as some of you will know, my main presidential theme last year was digital engineering turned into digital, or rather transformed into digital transformation partway through the year, and effectively about how within infrastructure, significantly, is mainly what the ICE does, but also buildings, of course, how we can get increased productivity, increased performance, increased understanding through taking a dual physical and digital approach in the planning, design, construction, operation, maintenance, refurbishment, etc. Full cycle. The good thing for me is that gives me a 3-year gig. The year I'm president, and the presidential themes tend to go for 3 years total. So I'm only halfway through, pretty much. Just a word for those who might not know the ICE. History has provided us with a fantastic headquarters here. We're in our bicentenary. The first official record of an ICE meeting was 2nd of January 1818 at Kendall's coffee shop on the Strand. And there's if you go out that way, there's a stained glass window which commemorates that on the way out. And in fact, our first president was Thomas Telford. We are now a global organisation with 97,000 members, spread around 160 countries, and a good 25% of whom live and work and have their being outside the UK. We're a charity. Our charitable purpose is pretty much the same as, it's a modern derivative, if you like, of the words written on our first Royal Charter, which glowers down at the President of the Year from the wall. And that talks very much, I mean, the formal words in there, which are written still, I think, onto chartered engineer certificates, are to harness the great powers of nature for the use and convenience of man. Now, we include women these days, obviously, we don't have enough of them, we'd like more, so, and also, that is taken now to include certainly very strong aspects of sustainable development, etc., etc. But it then goes on to talk about the different types of civil engineering as they existed then, and really we've modernised the words about how these are the basic requirement for economic growth, for trade and economic growth. And so we're still looking to walk that kind of talk. We work in 3 ways. I have 3 main areas. One is qualification of chartered civil engineers. People tell us, and we do strive to maintain being the gold standard in the world for professional qualification. Lifelong learning, because things do happen after you're 25, 28, whatever, and you become chartered. So we seek to provide that ability, facility, whatever, to our members and indeed others. And the third point, third area is thought leadership and influence, not as a trade lobby, but as an independent, authoritative body. And increasingly we find in the government, not just in the UK, but of other countries, seeking our advice on particular matters. Enough of that, that's far too much from me. Welcome all today. Let's have a quick tour de table, and please just a minute or so on who you are, where you come from, and why you're here, maybe. Tim.
Thanks, Tim, very much appreciated. My name is Tim Bowen. I'm the Managing Director of Aquam Technologies. Our guiding ethos is the development of a range of products and solutions that focus on technology-driven solutions for issues associated with ageing pipework. Principal to that are our diagnostic technologies, which generate a lot of data. So I'm very interested to hear and to discuss how we can use that data to more effectively deploy ongoing renewal of asset.
Hi, I'm Ben Pritchard. I'm a consultant at Invent. I won't introduce Invent too much because Cameron's got that job in a minute.
Thank you.
But we essentially we strive to create value through construction and for our customers through sort of data-driven, sensible solutions to a variety of aspects. And I'm very keen to help people sort of understand and sort of spread that we create lots of data as an industry, but we're not using it in the best way possible.
My name is Minnie Lu. This is more difficult to pronounce. So I'm coming from Petrofed, which is oil and gas EPC contractor, and I'm the good manager for civil structure, so I'm heading up the discipline. The reason I'm here is really to listen to how digitalization can reform and be more efficient use in other industries, and then apply back to the oil and gas industry. And I'm very much into the structural integrity assessment and management at the moment, so it would be interesting to use how data can beneficial for us in this field. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim Fitch, and I'm the co-owner of Invent. I'm not going to say anything more about Invent because I'll be stealing Cameron's thunder. I'll say a bit more about myself. I've been a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers. I was just working out 35 years, and I've been a fellow for 17. And I spent the first 24 years of my career in construction, working for construction companies of both very large tier ones and some specialist subcontractors. And I'm passionate in the last third of my career to move the construction industry forward. I'm particularly interested in construction improving its image and also becoming more sustainable, because the way it is at the moment in terms of profits, it's not. And just one final thing, Tim and I first met when I did a master's degree at UCL, which finished about 11 years ago.
Did we really?
And that's where I learned about Selfridges and the Ritz being very early adopters of steel frame structures.
And the ICU.
And the ICU. And the ICU.
Good morning, my name is Trevor McGinley. I'm a contractor, or at least represent a contractor. And it's quite interesting. The reason why I'm here is we have conversations with the likes of TfL, Network Rail and the like about how we can improve things, and they love this thing about we get the contractors to come up with solutions and innovations and ideas and implement them. And yet the reality is it's very much harder for us to do that because of the world we're in, particularly the world industry in particular. So what I'm here for is I'm really trying to understand a bit more about what's happening in the digital space, so that we can actually be part of the process of how we can actually bring some of these digitisation improvements actually into the industry, into a working environment, a real-time situation.
My name is Matt Colmer. I'm an independent consultant working in the built environment space. I work mostly on early stage R&D, mainly through Innovate UK and the UK Catapult Network, principally Future Cities Digital and Energy Systems Catapults. Previously, I was Lead Technologist Innovation Lead for Innovate UK, and I headed up their built environment and their infrastructure projects. looking at building performance, and that's where my main interest is why we design things to do A, and then it pops out the other end and does A times 9. And that's where the data as an asset, or the data piece, comes in, because we are very good at collecting data, we're not very good at implementing anything about that data. There's a huge communication problem throughout the entire supply chain from cradle to cradle, and no feedback loop. So we've made excellent inroads in what we collect, not very good inroads in how we collect it or how we use it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sri Vinayak. I am a consultant for Lemur Insights. We are a subsidiary of Invent Limited. I'm a civil engineer by profession. I've been working in the industry for about 7 years. I am a strong believer of enabling data-driven decision-making in the construction sector. As Matt mentioned, we are good at collecting information, but it's all in 40 million Excel sheets hidden in 500 different computers. My dream is to make sure that actually gets compiled and analyzed in a structured manner, developing solutions to do that, and enabling that data to actually be analyzed and then brought in as value to whether it be end users, clients, contractors, whomsoever who can best utilize that information. How do we do that? By using machine learning algorithms, statistical modeling, and forecasting methodologies. So I'm here to actually understand and discuss and listen to various people in the industry and how to efficiently enable this. Thank you.
Morning everyone, my name is Cameron Foley. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Invent Limited. I've recently joined from a Tier 1 contractor where I've spent 30 years in varying roles, from MD to for a number of specialist businesses to building business and civils business. So I have a broad range of skills. I'm not a member of the IC, I'm a member of the institution next door, so apologies Professor Tim. And in our line of business, we see the good, the bad and the ugly in construction. We want to create a more positive image of construction, and perhaps one way of doing that is to have fact-based decision making when we're choosing which projects to go and bid and win and build, and perhaps that can make the industry more sustainable for the future.
Good morning everybody, I'm Simon McCabe, I'm the Chief Technology Officer from Basetown. I think in the context of this meeting, Basetown hopes to be part of the solution to data collaboration, collection, processing. And we've been working with large civil engineering projects. I'm an outsider to the civil engineering space. I've been at the company for 5 years. My background is physics, so the PhD is physics, not anything to do with engineering, and I worked in the finance industry before that with data collection and processing. And we can see how data collection, processing and bad data impacted the finance industry in 2007, which is about the time I left, as a lot of people left the finance industry around that time. I'm hoping to learn a bit more about how other people see data collection and processing in the industry today.
I'm Chris Dyer. I work for a company called Yotta. We're a technology company working in infrastructure asset management, roots in data collection, but we're now focusing very much on our technology. We produce asset management software to help organisations such as local highway authorities, Highways England, predominantly in the highways and transportation space at the moment, to make good decisions with the data that they have. So it's either through operational asset management, collecting data through inspections and the like, and then annual survey data and other data sets to use that data to help make decisions. And we have provided software not only for the operation management of that, but also to use that data for long-term planning and strategic decision making. So we provide the tools for authorities to do that, and we have the expertise within the organisation that it's part of my role to sort of head up that part of the business to help organisations to make the best use of that data. Yeah, that's kind of what we do, expanding internationally at the moment, predominantly UK based, work with over 200 organisations across the UK, but also working in Australia, South America and in Europe as well, and it's expanding at the moment. So yeah, exciting times for our business.
Good morning, my name is Rolly Hugh. I'm the Senior Strategist, I think is the title, for Ordnance Survey. And what that means is that I look after our product sets, so everything that goes out the door, but with a particular focus on what we might be doing next. So Ordnance Survey is the national mapping agency for the country, and we're responsible for pushing out all of the maps, most of which people recognise in the form of the paper. That represents roughly 5% of the business. The rest is digital data, which underpins most of the decision-making processes around, certainly the building and construction side at national and local planning levels. It drives policy, it feeds the insurance sector and the such. Ordnance Survey itself, I think, beats the ICE, I'm afraid. We celebrated 227 years last week. So it's been around a long time. But through that time, constant change. And so we are very much in a period of very significant change, both from the sort of technology disruption, which I'm sure most people are feeling at the moment. And to that end, we are running a series of sandpit projects where we're focusing on new sets of requirements and new drivers for digital geospatial data specifically, and how that might act as an underpinning framework to support the transfer of some of the data that you might be bringing to the table specifically. On the website, there's an awful lot of information about those, and we would encourage anyone to get involved with those as they see fit.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Tracy. I'm CEO of Navy Bridge. We're a relatively youthful company towards my colleagues here. We're only 95 years in existence. What we do is actually, we're probably the smallest global company you've never heard of. We work in over 140 countries. And what we do is we manufacture bridges in the UK and export them around the world. Modular bridging. One of our main bridges is a derivative of the Bailey Bridge, for example. You know, it's an interesting and difficult business doing work in so many different countries. And the things we're looking at, we're undergoing a complete digital transformation in the sense that we're looking at everything we do, and ours is more around BIM and 3D modelling and working collaboratively. We're looking at the moment some flyovers in East Africa, and we're working with Atkins in Nairobi and Bangalore, and our guys are all working on the same models, and that's quite cute to see. You know, it's maybe not that advanced for some of you, but it is for me still. And in terms of data, the things we're looking at now are, you know, things like structural monitoring, and also just diving into the data we already have to understand more about our customers and where we should. If you work all over the world, it's as big a market as you can have. You have to understand all the criteria, and we've really done some work now to try and understand better, and that's ongoing, and I'm really interested in this discussion this morning. Okay.
Yes, thank you. That's a good varied mix of people, backgrounds, organisations, etc. Cameron, I cede to you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you to you for chairing the discussion, and to the ICE for hosting us here today. Invent Limited is a specialist construction business consultancy, and it was formed to help construction industry businesses get greater value from their investments. It was founded nearly 10 years ago by Tim Fitch and Brendan Morahan, who between them have nearly 70 years construction knowledge between them. The rest of the team are a mix of academic and industry professionals with a broad range of experience and skills. We work nationally and internationally with our customers, both large and small, and to help create value for them. We do that by working in a number of different ways, and there are 4 main strands to our business. We provide business strategy, so direction and speed of travel of your business. We can help point you in that right direction. We also do strategic business development, so that's more about winning more work by doing less. Operational efficiency, so in setting up your projects and your businesses, we can implement tools, give you advice and help to make you become more efficient in what you do and how you do it. And fourth strand, and this is the strand that's growing exponentially, is the R&D tax credit services. So we help construction businesses gain access to funds from HMRC and help provide that service. So today's event is more about providing thought leadership to a very hot topic, big data. And I was on the train this morning and turned the page on the Metro, and there's a great big advert for the NHS talking about data. So we're all talking about it, we're all using it, we're all using it in different ways. So how can we use big data to help the construction industry become safer, more predictable, and ultimately for everybody more sustainable for the future? So thank you, Tim, over to you.
Thank you. Well, the topic of the discussion, at least I've got, is data, an untapped gold mine for productivity. I mean, that's slightly Australian because it's a question. At the end, just some very, very brief thoughts. You know, when I entered the industry, probably about the same time you did, Tim, maybe a couple of years earlier, everything was paper, right? And I remember in my first undergraduate year selling a reasonable guitar that I bought but couldn't play. I bought it because I was going to be a student and I thought students play guitars. In that case I am. And I remember selling that and spending £35 on a basic calculator. Right? Why did I do that? Because using 7-figure logarithms to try and make head and tail of the first year land surveying was keeping me seriously away from the student bar. Yeah, all driven by things. At that time, of course, construction was largely driven by three issues: cost, quality, and time. And to an extent, it still is. But we have a range of other things, like vastly increased cognizance of health and safety, of sustainability, etc., etc. 20 to 25 years ago, I think, in the industry, as I recall it, IT started to emerge from being a plaything of finance directors who used it to run payrolls, but not much else. Okay, and then over the last generation, literally, we've seen an explosion of the ability to track things digitally. Right? Last June saw the 10th anniversary of the smartphone, and think how much personal lives, let alone businesses, have been transformed, or maybe have not been transformed as a result of that. In the UK, over the last few years, we've had a government mandate that all central government construction, be it buildings or infrastructure, be procured using a level 2 BIM technique, BIM, Building Information Modelling, which again has sort of brought data and integration of data to the forefront. I have to say that within the sector, it's affected what clients do, mainly governments, some others. It's affected what Tier 1 contractors, consultants do, maybe Tier 2. It certainly hasn't got down very much below that to where it could produce quite significantly more benefit. We're starting to see data being very much, in some areas, not in all, the key point of asset management. And a friend and former colleague who isn't here today, Charles Oldham, runs the, it's not called this, but it might be, Amy's Strategic Asset Management Consultancy. He's got 40 people, he's the only engineer, the rest are data scientists who have evolved from one type of background or another. Okay? So is this the way we're going? Inevitably, are we making enough out of data? I mean, if any other petrol heads here who might have watched the French Grand Prix at the weekend, you know, the driver drives a car and does so pretty well or very well. they've got a team of about 3 dozen people, some at trackside, some back in the UK, who are calling the shots. Throw up and really calling the strategy for the race. Yeah. Other areas of sports, I've got some notes here that say Team Sky, it's cycling. You know, train, the data are what drives the training program. It drives the diet, it drives the exercise, it drives the training, it drives the bike, etc., etc. The areas I thought it might be useful to talk about, but this is not my meeting, I'm just trying to push things along, are in areas like open data. You know, is it aspirational? Is it a good thing? Right. Skills, what types of new skills? We're towards the end now in the IC of a 6-month survey of what skills civil engineers will need over the next 10 years. Is a digital revolution a trigger that might actually get the industry dancing to a different tune? You know, it's GSK, the druggy company, pharma company, a few years ago, who approached one of my mates at Loughborough University, and this was on looking at the way buildings were built. And they said they've got 4 types of building, you know, going from research through to office. They'd refined their buildings, they thought, to the point where they couldn't refine them anymore using the techniques they were using. And their analogy there was that if they thought they were getting the best they could out of a Spitfire, they just needed the jet. Yeah. So not just a refinement, but but really quite a radical disruption. And last but by no means least, and something I think perhaps we find it hardest of all in the industry, is collaboration. Right? Using data, whether it's BIM, whether it's for maintenance purposes, whatever, doesn't work unless people collaborate closely. What stops them? Now, those are some thoughts from me. It might be the right thoughts, it might be the wrong thoughts. Who wants to start us up? And I'll try and guide us through as best I can.
On the collaboration, because there was a discussion.
Sorry, if I could, well, my apologies, I should have said two things. Number one, if you could speak up, not just for me, but so the mics can take you. And please, we're relatively informal here. If you want to go and grab some more coffee or whatever at any time, then do so. But if you can be quite discreet in doing it, we appreciate it.
Yeah, so the collaboration thing, I think, is absolutely critical. So we have been digitally orientated for, well, our first product, Mastermap, went out in 2000 as a fully digital concept, and one of the underlying factors of it was the concept of unique IDs that are persistent with the life cycle of the real world feature. So you have a one-to-one relationship between a footprint of a building and its ID. So a very early concept of digital twin, low level. And the idea was that ID would be something that could be shared across multiple agencies to then say, I've got a common interest in an asset, and on the basis of an ID only, you can exchange information. So you create a handshake, and then you have a layer or you have an ability to exchange more complex information about that feature. It didn't work, it didn't take off, and I think the reason it did is not because of the idea, but because of the execution and how it's presented to the community, which is very much, this is our representation of a building, this is our data format, this is our specification, and actually the access to it is through an infrastructure that we have created. Now, technology and things have moved on, and I think we're at a point in time where actually working as a community, that concept has a lot more credence. Also, with the advent of open data, the accessibility to those IDs and sharing of them becomes a lot more practical. But I think the issue that persists is actually the business models of a lot of the sector. So I had the pleasure of working in engineering consultancy for 20 years, and the thing that always frustrates is the project-led approach, where everything is contained, highly optimised within silos of activity, Whereas actually what we're talking about here is something that's horizontal across multiple agencies, multiple stakeholders through very extended periods of time. And the value of investment in data requires that upfront cost for long-term benefit. And so we're working against everybody's inbuilt financial interest here. So for me, that's the critical issue that we keep stumbling over.
I had the misfortune, I was part of Boris, the mayor's, he came up with this strategy document for 2050, and so he called out this group of people, and it was called the Infrastructure Strategy Board. And we were looking at these various aspects for the future, and as part of this board there were all the key representatives in terms of from Network Rail and British Gas and Highways Agency, everybody was there anyway. And there were two things which I thought were quite interesting from it. Number one was that a map was done by the GLA of all the services and infrastructure actually in London. It was fascinating looking thing, three-dimensional, brilliant. And I stood there and I thought, as a contractor, I said, oh great, it'd be great to have access to it. You can't have access to it, it's ours. And I went, oh, okay. And then everybody went around saying how they were unhappy with this information being made available. So BT was sitting there saying, well, we're not very comfortable with it. We don't think this information should be out there. It needs to be more controlled, as did the power people, so it went on. Interestingly, when we went and got to this whole thing about ownership of information and data and everything else, the key factor which was actually controlled were the regulators. And I was fascinated to understand the regulators were saying, no, we are insisting you control it. We insist that this is not shared. Collaboration is a strange thing because the governments and the regulators and everything else largely control so much of what each of these individual organisations do. And I learned a massive lesson just from that in terms of what I thought was just organisations being awkward. In fact, it's because that's what they're being told to do. They're being told to control it. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of how we're going to deal with collaboration as a problem. If I'm honest, when I looked at it, I remember thinking, the thing about this whole digital information is we need to go much earlier. We need to look at much more basic things. Bring it back down to almost intercompany type issues. Because even within our own company, I can assure you, people hold things deliberately on. You mentioned about spreadsheets. The people hold things on because it's power. And I'm thinking, how can we make that more open? How can we get around some of those issues and some of those concerns? I think one of the things about the digital world is, as much as it looks fantastic, people have some real genuine concerns about their positions and their roles and their responsibilities, especially in engineering. Engineers are engineers. They like to have solutions and have the information. It's in their heads and it's fantastic. Sharing it, they're less comfortable with.
That's the traditional school of thought, isn't it? Having information with you gives you that power. But across industries who've grown beyond construction, like when you look at where data is at construction, the data analytics of the data 1.0 is where you're looking at business intelligence to start off with. Surprisingly, that happened 20-25 years ago, and the construction industry is just starting to do that today. Data 2.0 is where we have big data and your social analysis and your behavioral side of things. But today, the global leaders in data analytics is in data 3.0, where you're doing machine learning and you're doing artificial intelligence and driving what you can do with the data rather than actually collecting the data, because that's already done. Going back to your point of Excel sheets and spreadsheets and why that is important is because that's how the business model is based on. You think as a business, your data gives you competitive advantage. Why would I share it with my competitor? Now that's where open data comes into the picture, because you can always anonymize it, which is something which is completely absent within our industry. You've got all these asset information siloed in millions of data sets, but there are people out there who are willing, who wants to analyze it because they just love to do it, but they just don't have access to it. Now, we're not saying we should take away all the asset information. Anonymize it. You have to agree on a method by which the data can be made available without actually losing control. And there are industries who are doing that. You just have to get what's...
Sorry, there's some great examples in the oil and gas industry where when the oil prices crashed decades ago, was it crime, I think? Yeah. Where the clients came together and go, right, we need to do something different here. And they started sharing anonymously cost data so they could understand what it was that they could do to improve how things were built, how it cost them, and drive the better way of doing things, a more efficient way of doing things, because they looked around and go, we won't survive unless we do something different. And that was the sort of the start of a process that they still do now. They still have a consultancy that collates anonymous data from all of them, Shell, BP, all of the others, provide data of how much everything costs, and then benchmark data is provided to the whole industry. You know, this pipe is this much, this is that, so people understand and know what the baseline for their industry is and how they should improve it. It's all done on spreadsheets still, so it's massively inefficient. However, the principle and the idea behind it is sound. And just quickly on the open data bit, I mean, there's some great examples here in London with TfL, where they have just provided data sets, not knowing what will happen, but great things have come off the back of it. Things like Citymapper are saving TfL, I think it's 120 million a year, just by, you know, here's what people use our services for. And then Citymapper created a way that people could better know how to get around, and there's a lot less stress on the tube network and on the best network. Because of that, they better know where maintenance is required, because they better know who's going where. Often with data, it's the externalities that create value that is difficult to initially put a number on, and that's where we as an industry struggle to really, so, you know, we expect the pound sign from the off. We expect to know how much something, what the return of investment directly to me will be, but often it's indirect when we share data, and that's where we struggle a little bit, I think, as an industry.
As an industry, construction industry particularly, shares information across certain areas of construction, which is predominantly health and safety is one. So health and safety is a major area where it doesn't matter which tier where you sit, we provide information, data across the industry, and we try and learn from that. We have forums, we have meetings, we have government initiatives that help us do that. Why can't we do that with other aspects? The construction industry as it sits today, in terms of productivity, in terms of profits, it's not a pretty picture out there at the moment. One of the things that we've got much better at is health and safety, by collaborating, by sharing information, by sharing data. So over time, health and safety has got better, but again, over time, productivity is still decreasing. We're still putting bricks on bricks. We're still pumping concrete. And surely, with all the knowledge across all the tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, across all the consultants, there must be a better way of trying to share relevant data and help drive proper decision making. I know that when I was in tier 1 contractor, the phrase that used to drive me mad was, well, we've always done it this way, and your gut feel tells me that we should do this. Well, actually, if you look back, gut feel has always got us into a problem. So, is there a way of collecting system-wide or sector-wide data that will help the construction industry compete with manufacturing or the oil and gas industry or whatever industry it is? I just feel that we can do more in that field.
Just to contribute a little bit, my reasonably cynical view people is that there are, and people in business, is that there are only really two motivations. One's fear, the other's greed.
Yeah.
And that the greed one is if I do something a different way, I might make some more money out of it. I'm being really cynical here. The fear one is if I don't do something, I might go out of business. And so you get people doing things because the law says, or the regulation says, where if you get found out by the law, etc. Or the standards or codes say, because that's proper to those who can't defend other things. Turning that to data, to me it's things like, where does value lie? Does it lie with me? Does it lie with somebody else? If I put the work in, does somebody else get the benefit? This was one of the big issues in the early days of BIM, don't like the title, but I'm probably forced to use it, where there was a perception in the design community, in the architects and the analysts, the engineers, that they were putting more effort in, but it was perhaps the contractors who were getting the benefit because they had potentially less issues to deal with on site, etc. I'll just throw that into the is it a perception of value as much as anything else that's stopping them? We have no customers here. We have no user groups, which may or may not be a good thing.
So I think in many respects it's a function of a couple of things, and the solutions lie in part as driving the combined whole. We mustn't escape the fact that the competitive intensity of this industry is absolutely fierce. You spoke about margin depression, and many contractors and tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, consultants, having to face one another day in, day out in terms of tenders and price opportunities, where price is a significant determinant of reward criteria, and you're going to need to do that day in, day out, week in, week out, in order to survive as a business. And therefore, in order to drive greater collaboration and the sharing of information and data, what we need to do is to move from a short-term project-centric approach to a longer-term enterprise approach, whereby we put ourselves into frameworks whereby we've genuinely got alignment of overall intent between the parties. And so I honestly believe that it needs to be solved as a part of a whole, collaboration, procurement and the sharing, because to try and do one on its own simply won't work within this industry, frankly, because the competitive intensity is so fierce, as I very well know.
I would agree with you, and in some ways I think the spectre over the construction industry is what happened with Carillion. If that can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. But to a certain extent, without going into those details, the issue was it was just totally unprofitable, and that is as you said, the price concerns. But I don't think we'd all like to get more money for what we do. That's not going to happen, so we have to change how we do it. So then it absolutely leads to collaboration and sharing of data. For example, I would like to get more for what we do, but you have to then think about it differently, and you have to then enter into relationships where it's not just one-off. And I think a really good example at the moment is HS2. Potentially that is just such a huge project. It can't be business as usual. But yet I'm seeing that, while there's great words being spoken, price is beginning to creep up as being more and more important. And I think actually there needs to be talk about securing the product that's needed for it, and longer term relationships. Now, with people like Costain, who I think sort of 80% of their business is negotiated, they have the ability then to actually properly collaborate and share. And that maybe is the way forward, I think.
No, I think that's right. I think the idea of the one team approach and not absorbing self-reliance necessarily as a tier 1 supplier, and looking at the supply chain and the skills that you've got across the different organisations that can provide there, I think is absolutely critical. And I think experience that I've had I've worked in a local authority on a contract where you're engaging with, or used to work in the contracts management sort of part, overseeing the highway contract at the time, and engaging at tier 1, you can't have access to that supply chain, and so often things are sort of hidden away for commercial reasons and commercial gain on the basis that tier 1 profitability and that kind of thing is we can do all of this, but actually negates the benefits that you can gain across the supply chain. And I think having that idea that working together, you can become more profitable, and the customer ultimately experience becomes greater, and actually engaging the customer across as part of that one team approach and sharing the information across it, everybody can benefit, and the efficiencies that can be gained are significant. And the idea again of that, having project approach rather than end-to-end thinking, understanding from the inception right the way through to decommissioning of anything, you're understanding the whole process, and actually everyone can play their part and gain from it. And I think that commercial sort of intent actually, and I think procurement teams have a lot to sort of play within that as well. The industry that procurement have created around, rather than understanding what value actually is, procurement are just looking at cost and understanding actually I can get that for that price and that for that price, and not understanding the whole process and what value can be added from across the whole chain.
So as the procurement man in the room, so I spent a number of years, 7 years client side in the nuclear decommissioning industry. We had a framework in place, and two things that I tried to do that got me in trouble. One was I wanted to tell the supply chain what my budget was for every project, because I thought, well, there's no point in telling me things that are unachievable. Yeah. It's about, this is how much I've got, how can I achieve my goal? That got me in trouble with the regulator, because they will have, well, I'll just give you that price and it might be half of it. I was like, well, fine, we've done our job, we've achieved it on budget, and we can work out backwards. But the regulator supposedly didn't like that, but it was because he didn't understand what the impact was. And then I went to the supply chain and went, well, here's my 5-year projects that I have. How about we share them all? Everyone has a certain element of work, and we see how we can improve. And the sort of the stronger supply chain member, he was like, no. He was he was going on greed. He was like, no, I know I can get 2/3 of that, not my 1/3. Why would I do that? And I was like, well, because it's guaranteed 1/3, and think of all the savings that you'll make not having to bid all the time. And it was a very strange. So you think you're doing what's best for everyone in the room, but there's this inherent behaviour that is what's stopping us collaborating, what's stopping us sharing data. That kept getting in the way. That sort of, I guess that what you were talking, the driver of people, that greed and almost an ego bit as well. Going, well, no, I know I can do that better. I know I can do that bigger. And I was like, well, let's just do it to the best that we possibly can for everyone. And there just seemed to be, the person, not all the best intention of the data, the person was still where it all got stuck.
I think that's an important point, actually, in the degree to which there's maturity and industry readiness for sharing and true collaboration. It takes time, but somebody needs to jump across the Rubicon first, and then have the staying power to stick with the industry while it matures, going through the points that you're talking about. You're getting pushback from short-sighted individuals usually, saying, no, actually, I can take more of this. Really, somebody needs to have the staying power to help the industry to mature through that very difficult period whereby clients and procurement departments within the client organisations are attempting to procure collaboratively, but the industry perhaps isn't necessarily ready for that yet.
I think there's an element of generationally, millennials and the next generation, they overshare, they tell everyone everything. whether we want to or not, we'll tell you anything. And so it's just easy for us. We find it difficult almost to shut up and not tell you what everything and anything about a project is. But
the thing about, again, going back to data on construction projects and processes and businesses is the fact that as, say, tier 1s make an average of 1.5 to 2%. But can we grow that as a group? Will that enable tier 1s to make changes to their behavior? By sharing data, if in the long run, again, in short term, it's almost impossible. If in 5, 10, 15 years, that grows to a 4% or a 5%, will that solve that greed challenge? I think that's something worthy of discussion. And the whole idea of a tiered approach as compared to a one-team approach, I'm obviously for the one-team approach, because it brings in open data, it brings in collaboration, it brings in sharing, and obviously towards a strategic aim. Data has been compared to oil for multiple reasons. The difficulty in mining it and bringing it out and bringing the value, but also fueling something called as productivity. Now, taking a simple example, going back to the spreadsheets, because I just like the way how construction companies just get mined into using spreadsheets. There are people whose job is to just compile tens of spreadsheets every day in, day out. Now, there are already softwares out in the market which lets you automate that process. Now, I'm not saying we are going to take away people's jobs, but that you can get more productivity out of that individual who are trained to be engineers, not people who just want to work at just mining and compiling Excel sheets.
I think that's interesting, yeah. The point you're raising there, I don't want to take people's jobs, because that's also part of the problem, isn't it? That actually, rather than thinking, I'm not saying, you're saying this, I'm saying, rather than thinking, not taking people's jobs, it's actually what's the most efficient way of working. Those people can be, redeployed in a way that actually gives you greater value.
You're a trained engineer. Why do you want to?
Why do you need to continue to do this repetitive process here all the time? Actually, the machine do the repetitive process, and that you can do the creative input. And understanding how that works end to end, rather than defend the status quo, if you like.
I think it's the cultural thing again, which has been raised a couple of times. I think there are certain words that we use which I think are actually barriers for us doing this, and sharing is one of them. Sharing is a big barrier for people to understand. It's the accessibility of data, it's not necessarily the sharing of data. And I think as an industry we look at it maybe from the wrong direction. So we look back, and the spreadsheet isn't exactly a brilliant example in terms of I have a spreadsheet of information, you have a spreadsheet of information. It may contain the same information, but it's not described in the same way.
Yeah.
And so we come from the lens of looking backwards and saying, how can we standardise? How can we get all these pieces of information in a way which we can share? And we're ignoring the new, well, not the new, they're not new at all. I mean, the whole, going through fuzzy logic to machine learning into that, saying, actually, you just give me the information and I can make a pretty good stab about what that information means, to put it into a way where you can actually start comparing it with very little time spent. When I was with Innovate UK, we did, as I said, I worked on the building performance evaluation. We set through, which was monitoring the performance of buildings, CO2 and energy and all metering readings and all that kind of stuff. And we wrote a very detailed protocol that people should follow to do that. And all information came out differently and you couldn't compare it. Even though we wrote the standard, we said this is what we must do. Because at that point, doing the whole fuzzy logic point of saying, okay, we know this is temperature data, we can then work it out from there on. We just didn't have a grip on that. That is changing significantly now.
Yeah, the USP is, if you like, is on, for an organisation, is on the ability to take that data and do something clever with it. Yeah. Not necessarily in the data itself, it's turning it into usable information.
It's the
that enables to make a decision.
derived data that has the data.
That's absolutely, so I think that's absolutely the case. And so when there's issues of competitive issues, well, if you've got technology or the skills or the ability to interpret that data in a way that gives you greater value, well, that's where the organisation's USB comes into play. So actually, that's where you can compete, isn't it? It's at that level.
Yeah.
And it's quite. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I was going to say, I was going to jump back on a point I found quite fascinating, if I'm honest with you, this thought about looking at data like as oil. Only because I'm thinking to myself, that's quite interesting, because if you think about it, what drives oil and the developments of everything else is what its end use is, in terms of running machines and everything. And to a point, have we got it wrong in terms of we spend a lot of time refining the oil, but actually we haven't got to the other end, which is how we're going to use it and what sort of machinery. Because I do think there is a problem with the hardware, the technology, the use of it actually within the construction industry. The construction industry is not particularly quick. The technology is moving at a pace much quicker than we are, and that's just being honest in terms of where we are with it. I still use pen. But the thing about it is that those sorts of things would actually have, if we had systems which needed certain bits of data, if we had things which needed, that would, from my point of view, drive better behaviours, or give people a better focus rather than the data itself. And I think there is probably a problem, as I said, a problem of data. There's a lot of it. People actually make it their job. And I don't just mean here, but I mean even my little company. We talk about spreadsheets. Their world is that data they've just collected. I mean that's their job, sort of thing. So you know, rather than actually what it's being used for.
Yeah.
And in a world where we're looking at productivity and how we can be more productive, it's okay, that's wonderful. How much use is that really? Now question some of these things, but having something to feed it.
For me, so within the engineering sector, when I was working there, there was definitely a preference for highly focused data capture for specific purposes, which immediately puts a shelf life on it, and it becomes lowest common price and has a usability only for the purpose that it was collected. Moving into the environment of a national mapping agency where it's all about reusability, so capture once, use as many times as possible across as many different applications as possible, so you work with a range of different people to try and understand what those uses are. So we have a very strong focus on sets of outcomes, but we're still trying to draw that off common data inputs. So I think the analogy with oil, you know, it's an appealing one, but it breaks down quite quickly because data is not finite, it is highly reusable, and you have to invest in it and you have to maintain it.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that sort of get forgotten about. We're all focused on the capture.
Yeah.
What about that reuse and
I think
currency?
I think you make a good point, and as an industry, one of the differences between the oil and what you were talking about then, and us as an industry, there hasn't been as strong a link, and it's gaining ground between the outcomes and the start. You know, how you design and build, and whether you were building something better, the outcome of that didn't impact what you were getting as much as it is now. You know, now that we have data that says better built schools create better grades, better offices create more productive workers, with those outcomes, people now have to focus upon them at the start, and is creating that loop, which was required in oil, because you had a direct link to the outcome. And now as an industry, as the value chain is sort of becoming more integrated, you need that sort of throughput, so people are becoming more focused and thinking about it more, because it does impact on the stages a lot more now than it used to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think understanding that data, if you like, has its own life cycle. If you think about a piece of infrastructure that you're building, it's created, it's maintained, it's looked after, then it's decommissioned. Same with data. Data needs to be treated as such that actually it has its own life cycle, it has its own approach, it needs to be managed effectively so that you understand what its purpose is for, what else it can be used for, multiple ways, and get the most you can from it, and understand that it has a shelf life, and then what needs to be renewed and managed. And I think that's the benefit of where we're going into in terms of things like big data that's out there, information that's really going to be sort of through the Internet of Things, streaming information, and be able to capture and make use of that, together with survey data that's captured either annually or monthly or frequency, and understanding how those different things work together to give you the outcomes that you want, and understanding what those outcomes are, what you're collecting, how you're managing it, what value you're placing on that. That's really critical.
Thanks. I wonder if we can spend a few minutes just trying to get underneath the concept of value. Right? And in my possibly out of date mind framework, we still have data that turns into information that, if we're clever, we can turn into knowledge. And they are three separate components. Sorry, I'm just throwing a lot of stuff out. Michael, you were talking about structural monitoring. When you've got those types of sensors, you're really actually looking for nothing to happen. Right? But you want a sense that if something does happen in 37.5 years or whatever, you capture it and you know what to do with it. But really, value, I sense there's a frustration here. And there's always going to be a frustration with a very fragmented, large industry sector. There isn't one industry sector which the government thinks it is, but it is probably about 30 sectors. How do we get out? How can we develop a better concept and understanding of value that we can use to unblock things?
It's a very interesting point you've raised, Tim, because, and reflecting back on what you said earlier in your introduction, around value is in the eye of the beholder. So, in very simple terms, if you're a client, good value is probably lowest cost or very close to the lowest cost. And if you are in the supply chain, value is profit. And those two things are mutually incompatible, as Michael so rightly said. You know, we want more for what we're doing. But in reality, unless the industry, and it doesn't matter whether you're a tier one or someone in the specialist supply chain, unless you can reduce your costs so that you can win the volume of work you need at an acceptable margin, you will have a marginal business. And if we look at what's happened to the tier ones, and of course they really are in the spotlight because of the Korean debacle, in reality they are breaking even at best, at volume. I don't know of a single high volume contractor who operates in the traditional sense that's making wonderful margins. I know what Tim's going to say in a minute, but I've got a certain degree of scepticism. The one exception I can really think of is Murphy, but of course they self-deliver a greater part of what they do compared with the average or the standard one. Now, in my belief is that we have, as an industry, we're waiting for some form of regulation, because it works so well with health and safety, to force people to collaborate or force the government to stick to its pipeline of opportunity so everyone can align behind that, or whatever it might be. But in reality, I think that, going back to what drives people, it's either greed or fear, most construction businesses should be fearful of a new entrant who won't worry about the old way of doing things. They will create a new way of delivering projects, 0.5% cheaper than everybody else, but perhaps 10 or 12 or 15% lower cost. And they won't be worrying about getting billions and billions and billions of pounds worth of revenue initially, because they'll be able to pick and choose the right projects for them because they've got a cost advantage. And my view is it will be driven entirely by data, operational data.
Just building on your point there, Tim, there's a business imperative to drive productivity, and that inherently involves R&D. And you're right, tier ones don't have the money to spend on R&D, and construction needs to start moving into that space, or, as your point, others are going to come into that space. Look at what Elon Musk is doing. Very wealthy individual, he's sending cars into space, so he's competing with NASA, he's building hyperloops, and he's recently set up an academic facility as well.
And the tunnel has moved into the tunnel.
I know that a couple of years ago we lost, we had an office in San Francisco, we lost 6 people to Google. Seasoned project managers, engineers of many years service moving across into Google. Google see an opportunity, Elon Musk sees an opportunity, there must be others out there that see the opportunity within construction.
Comment, 8 of the world's top, or the world's most capitalised companies, richest companies if you like, trade data now. 8 out of the top 10.
Well, it's putting on Tim's point actually, because your point is now reality, where you've got Alphabet, which obviously the parent company of Google, have got Sidewalk Labs, which are building a suburb in Toronto purely based on data. Yeah. And that's what they're doing there, and they pull their costs down based on analytics and data, and that is happening now. Alphabet is building a part of a city.
I think the other thing that data gives you, so a new sense of value is certainty. So your sensors, they're not actually telling you nothing. What you're building there is a picture of performance of how those bridges are. That allows you then to move into a predictability. And one of the things, coming from the public sector, certainty of delivery and performance and outcomes far outweighs costs and things, because you can justify costs based on those priorities. So if we have data to support those types of insights,
well,
that would be
that's fine. But my contention would be we don't know how to define performance. on most types of infrastructure. So we use very crude, big hammers to crack a nut, like whether a train is on time or not.
Yeah.
Right. What the delay period is for A&E in a hospital. Those sorts of things. And then they then become the markers.
Absolutely.
Rather than the network of stuff and data or whatever that leads to that position.
We need better data to support better levels of insights to drive.
But do we need the performance definitions first?
It's a very, very interesting point. So just to take another example of Netflix, to go to get to that point exactly. So Netflix used to have, when you watch a series on Netflix, it will ask you whether you like it or not. They would ask you to rate it on a 0 to 5 scale. They've changed that methodology for the past 12 years, where they've actually put that price of $1 million for someone who comes up with an algorithm to better predict what, as a viewer, you would like. The reason being, that individual who won the prize developed an algorithm to understand what drives people's viewing activity. Now, going back to performance, if we have enough data, in an ideal world, we should be able to create an algorithm which teaches itself what those performance drivers are. It could be a mix of multiple factors, but then there are people who have done it in the past, but I don't know whether we have enough data to do it, but it's doable. But someone should actually be able to collect that information and then try to put that performance indicator together. It won't be one KPI. It will be a mix of KPI, mix of weights, and also it also will include social factors, behavioral factors, not just crude numbers to go with it.
We talk, a lot about sort of the outcomes and things like that, but there's, as well as that, as an industry, there's a mindset that you do require to change, and is it a change to actually, we should be a service industry, we should be service-led, we should be thinking first about what are we trying to do, why are we trying to do it, and work back from there, and that would change how we prioritise data and how we look at the data, and really taking that sort of, that look at, we collate the information, we add the context to it that changes it to knowledge and why we're building what we're building and how best to build this. Too often through the planning process, through the project, I build this because my gut says. It's taking subjectivity away from so much of what we do that makes us inefficient. The subjectivity of the project process, of the approval process, is why it takes us 25 years to say yes to a runway, why it takes us 30 years to say yes to a power station. It's too much about what the perception of people think, rather than actually this is why it's good for UK PLC, for the local community, and this is why we should do it, and then go from there.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's understanding the outcomes and the performance that you're wanting, or what the customer's requirement is, and then working your way back as to what's needed across that. So often you can find that they're working in silos, they're working in actually this part of the process I'm looking at here, and the performance required from this end to this end, but not considering the wider picture of the way they work. And typically in a local authority that can happen when you're looking to maintain the highway network. They just think about, I'm looking after the footpath, or I'm looking after the carriageway, or I'm looking after the street lights, or I'm looking after the structure. I'm not thinking about the impacts of fence-to-fence approach of how I'm managing my infrastructure, the impact one piece of asset has on the other, which is the same for anything that they're measuring. So they're measuring it independent of the wider context. They understand the organisational objective, but they're not having that line of sight that takes you from operational activity through to the strategic objective of the organisation as a whole, and the impacts the infrastructure has on the customer and the customer's need.
Leading the witnesses, in a sense, if I said something as extreme as we don't really have an understanding of where value comes from the data, and so we don't know who to try to apply leverage to, right? And secondly, we don't understand what we mean by performance of an infrastructure asset. Is that too extreme? I mean, there are bound to be areas where that isn't the case.
So I think there are a couple of areas whereby line of sight is perhaps easier than in others. So I think ultimately the outcomes we can pretty much boil it down in my mind to, you know, what are the outcomes we desire? Well, as a society, we want more and better quality infrastructure within our affordability constraints, full stop. So how do we get that, and how does data help us achieve that? So there's some productivity associated issues that we've spoken about. Now that's a little bit more nebulous, a little bit more difficult to get a line of sight on. But one that I think is achievable in the short term is better quality decision making around what we do and when we do it. So, for example, data-driven replacement and asset maintenance, so that we don't end up spending money on assets that frankly don't need to be maintained because it had to come to the top of a list on a temporal schedule of what needs to be done. What we're actually doing is using data from the asset itself to pinpoint what needs to be done. So it drives out waste and liberates all of this money to actually focus on what does need to be done, which may not necessarily be on the top of the list.
So that's condition monitoring.
Yeah. So I think that is a real area that we can focus on.
But I think it probably goes beyond condition monitoring into understanding what that, if you're looking at infrastructure, what that piece of infrastructure is there to do.
Sure.
And and therefore that value lies at that point, doesn't it? To says, well, what's its purpose? What purpose is it serving? Who is it serving? And therefore, why am I maintaining it?
Is that the same as when it was designed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We got the first Forth Bridge there. Is that the Britannia Bridge up there? I ought to know, but whatever. I mean, they're both very old and very, very much still working.
Yeah.
And you don't need to paint that all the time.
Is there not a point, and you know, a confession here in some ways, that as a company you tend to be drowning in data. We've never had as much data.
Yeah.
And I like your point about oil in some ways. It's everywhere. It's trying to understand, and you mentioned about service and health and safety has been a dramatic change in the industry, and a lot of it because it's been measured. And you know, in some ways, it's also if you measure it, you have a chance of actually doing something with it. And we're doing a similar thing with our service levels, and we've seen dramatic changes in that again. So in other words, you know, I read data all day at our company. It's just trying to work out what's the important stuff.
Yeah. But what you found with health and safety, there was a driven outcome required, and we skilled people. We have health and safety professionals. We don't have data professionals generally as an industry. You know, why are we not changing who we employ? As you were saying about Amy, 38 data scientists helping to understand. You ask engineers, QSs, whoever it is, here's loads of data. All right, I'll just do what I've always done.
Absolutely. By the way, my mate Charles is going to retire in the next 3 or 4 months, so there will be no injuries. Minnie, you've been very patient. Do you have any insights from a slightly different sector that can encourage us or maybe further frustrate us?
Yeah, I think that, going back to your point about value, I don't think that industry don't understand the value sharing data and all this data reform bring to us. I think that it's really, the industry really need to join force together because the value is not going to sit with individual company, individual sector, but will benefit the industry as a whole. So it really needs the top player of the industry join force together to create a platform for people to sharing, and then the whole industry move forward and create the value as a whole. So, for example, in the oil and gas industry, very often, if there's anything significant going to happen in the industry, it's normally the top tier 1 operator like the Shell, the BP, and ConocoPhillips, and those big names. They join force together, have a really a team to drive some innovation idea forward. So I say that, for example, very simple example of data sharing, geotechnical data. Very often when we come into a project, there is a project that built next to us that have all the geotechnical data. They drill lots of boreholes, but nobody's going to share it with you. But you have to employ another team and do another 3-month survey and find out exactly the same data as the one that's 3 meters away from you. And the ocean data is exactly the same, and seabed data is exactly the same. So you have all the sites building around you, have all the data, but nobody is going to share. So if some of the top the top player in the industry join forces together, saying that this sharing data is going to benefit us as a whole. Let's do it. Then it's a lot easy for other people to join force. And also because they are owning most of the project and they paid for most of the data. So if they're willing to share, you probably cover 80% of the data already. So I think that it's that's what I feel that the sharing data need to come from the government, the top client, and to build a platform for everybody to participate. And then collecting all this, that will just promote the whole industry and give the value for the whole industry.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just as a comment to that, British Geological Survey holds a national database of borehole data, but it's not mandatory to provide information to it. Just on sharing information, I understand that there are more than 120 separate agencies who have the automatic right to dig up London's roads. I think that goes out to the M25, so it's not just the GLA. There have been attempts over the last few years to develop a database of underground assets. The various parties involved have not been able to agree that it's in their mutual interest to do so, and to pay for its maintenance. That's it's not that I think they're willing to provide, but no one seems to be willing to pay. Right? And I don't know about you, but there are some attempts now to stop the same bit of road being dug up and resurfaced 3 times in 6 months, but it hasn't stopped it.
Do they see? It's just a question. Do they see value in their own hoard of data? Because presumably they have to hold on to those individual companies have to have that data.
Yeah, well, it's the utilities, other service providers, etc. They must see value in their own.
I think so. That's a community I've worked with a lot.
Yeah.
So I had the
not surprised
misfortune of working on PAS on 215.
Yes.
The standard for data exchange, and that was a very interesting process where what you saw was a very good opportunity to create data at least to a common standard to enable exchange. So you've got a hole, you're in it, you're looking at stuff, you're capturing data for your own purposes. If you could create some common schema that then would allow you to share that at least, so some definition of features, wouldn't that be useful? Well, apparently not, because it introduced costs at that point of price differentiation when you're bidding for that whole digging exercise.
Sure.
And so we come back to that notion of highly optimized delivery of a function, not of that end-to-end service.
Yeah.
So Project Iceberg is one of those sandpits that OS is working on at the moment. There you go. And the thing that is missing is those agencies and departments, they are willing to share. What is missing is the infrastructure to enable them to do it in a cost-effective way.
Yeah.
And I think that they are looking for someone, maybe government. You mentioned government taking a leadership role, and I'd be interested to hear what people thought about that. But there is a need for some sort of agnostic entity to take a role forward, and there isn't as an aggregator of data. Technology enables us to federate and to exchange information in a wealth of different ways, but there is a responsibility ownership needed somewhere.
But this is an area where there are quite a number of quite diffuse ownerships. Regulators, a whole panoply of governance, and it's trying to get someone to actually draw them together. My analogy would be that as whatever it is has provided the proverbial horse trough, but the horses don't want to drink.
The local authority has a coordination function through network management to coordinate all utilities on the roads and openings and everything else.
Yeah, but
not all utilities are in a row, though.
No, okay.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, can I say we're 9:45. what I'm intending to do is, rather than spend 15 minutes summing up, is just to say we started a few minutes late. If people are prepared to carry on a few minutes, I'm going to let this run for 10 minutes and then just go around the table and ask people just for a couple of sentences on whatever they would like to contribute that they think would add value to this. That's fine.
Yeah, of course.
Can we move on to collaboration a bit more? It strikes me that you cannot force people to collaborate, right? You can force people to look as though they're collaborating. You can force people to share things through with teeth. But if you do that, you never get the fullness of here's the data and this is what it means and this is how you should view it, etc., etc. So again, there's a pretty standard for collaboration, isn't there?
There's an international standard there.
Yeah, okay, fine. So it's fine to have these things, but why aren't they more used? Is that the right question?
No, it's a very, very good question, because as we say, collaboration requires consenting adults.
Yes.
And
yes.
Because we know what the opposite of consenting adults leads to. So one thing that we see time and time again is that one party, it's often the client, will say we're going to do either BS 11001 or ISO 14001, we're going to have that on our project because it's a good thing. And the supply chain will respond, and they will send their people like us, and we will prepare them as best we can in the limited time available to appear to be collaborative. But it's often the case that when you get down to brass tacks, that there isn't sufficient buy-in from both parties to what the other party's real needs are and what the likely benefits are to both parties. There won't be the same benefits, by the way. And it often, I've seen, there's been a missed opportunity because the ultimate leadership hasn't been there to sell the vision. And I think, to take the point that was raised earlier, I mean, the construction industry is project orientated. We do projects, very surprising. But when we talk about collaborations, they're often just focused on a particular project, even if it's a client that is likely to do repeat business. And you haven't got that continuity of thought, and you haven't often got a senior enough person coming in and saying, look, come, let's make a success of this because we have this huge pipeline behind us, and we want to save some money, and you want to make some money, and we've got to work out a way of squaring that circle. You want to maximise profits, we want to minimise costs. How are we going to do that? Without everyone falling out and having a terrible punch-up and being frustrated and angry and all the rest of it. Our experience is there is often a way of doing that, but you do need to take a longer-term view, and it needs some very senior leadership to get the teams to do it. That's my thoughts on that.
I find that definitely at the ground level, people want to collaborate. They will collaborate. They will find the tools to collaborate. They will get together, and it's where you hit contractual boundaries or things move up the chain and the fear kicks in. You know, Tim talked about fear and greed, and most of the people we come across are driven, particularly in tiny margin environments, by fear. So yeah, we see on large projects which haven't been tooled up sufficiently that engineers are collaborating using whatever tools they can get their hands on. So they'll use WhatsApp to share and communicate and collaborate. I've even heard of people using other tools where the data is even more lost to the industry. So I mean, I'm interested in it sounds like you're driving a very top-down approach. So let's use a collaboration standard. How do we harness the energy of the people who want to collaborate in the industry, who are already trying to do it, who are frustrated by kind of infrastructure and the methodologies that are being imposed?
You're right. There's a generation thing here.
I think to some extent it's generation.
There's the whole millennial culture and mindset, which is very different from I'm an old baby boomer, and in my own business, we have to have two cultures because there's my culture and my business associates culture, and then most of our employees, there's some of them around the table, are young enough to be my children. In fact, I've got employees of mine who I know their parents are younger than me, which is well, it's the inevitable march of time. And one of the things that we see is, and the thing that actually gets me really mad about this industry, is when I see young people who have been trained by their bosses, who presumably my age or even younger, to behave in the 1980s and 1990s way, which is, you know, you've got a toolbox for dealing with your subcontractors, which has a hammer in it, and not much else. And frankly now, the way I view that, it's the corruption of youth. And that has got to change, because we're just repeating the mistakes of the past if we allow that to happen. So I'm agreeing with you. Unfortunately, it's harnessing the current leadership to maximise that natural collaborative mindset, if you like, of the millennials. That's, I think, to my mind, that's one of the key cornerstones now.
A couple of other quick points, because I'm not wanting to keep you long beyond the appointed hours. One of my responsibilities.
Just to add on to what Tim was talking about, but a slightly different perspective. No one's going to collaborate unless they're going to get some financial benefits out of it. Inherent idea how businesses behave, but that in itself is changing. Modern businesses are trying to be collaborative because they know for a fact that they can make more money together. Instead of solving the big question in one go, can we find methods to incentivize in smaller packages data sharing? Things like data markets are becoming a thing nowadays, where if you have data, there's a marketplace, online marketplace like eBay or your Amazon, where you can sell data. There are specific marketplaces for very specific information popping up in the last 5 years. Now, can we do something like that for construction sector, where you're not giving away all of your secrets, you're giving away only the things that you want to give, but at the same time you get a small financial benefit out of it. Mm-hmm. That's a good place to start, but then that's not obviously the final solution. So if we can develop those small nudge kind of incentivizing schemes to start sharing data, then people will start realizing the value, and then that can actually lead to a finer pathway for collaboration, for understanding what value is, for understanding what performance means, and for actually using the best out of the oil, data, value, whatever we think it is.
So I'm going to disagree with you slightly. From a sort of a incentive to collaborate, I think there's more than just as individuals a financial incentive. There's a sort of a social and a sort of a proud, I am proud to be part of the successful delivery of a school, a Crossrail, a Olympics, or even an extension to a house that has improved the life of someone. I think as an industry, and this goes back to one of the things Tim said right at the start about improving our image as an industry, we need to shout much louder and demonstrate with data how we are transforming and improving lives. And that element, that sort of proudness of being part of it, will help you collaborate when you realise that collaboration leads to better outcomes for everyone.
It's making that step, isn't it? And cynical me would say being proud for poor but pay them all. Can I just think, can we just go around the table and ask for a nugget or whatever from each person, Michael? Can we go this way around?
Okay, well, I just go back to collaboration. I think you are onto something. You mentioned the Olympics. That's probably one of the better projects that you put forward as the UK construction doing very well. That was very, very strongly led. I think that's maybe an example of something we could use.
Just a thought. We talked about culture and some of the difficulties of overcoming some inherent beliefs. Government is often portrayed as being quite traditional. I think if you haven't already reviewed the work of the NIC and their Data for Public Good, some of the work by the IPA, the Centre for Digital World Britain, they are really driving a very different set of thinking around the value of data and how it can drive those better outcomes, and look at problems horizontally, so very much on the smart agenda. So I would encourage people to engage with those discussions.
No, from my point of view, I was thinking understanding what motivates the need to change the way we behave and what we do, and understanding, looking at collaboration and working together, and understanding what the customer's needs are, but also understanding that if we continue to behave in the way we currently do, we're not actually going to see a change ultimately in the way into our customers, the way we work. And so understanding what it is that's going to drive that change. So health and safety, which I thought was interesting at the beginning, there's a clear objective and there's a clear need to collaborate because of the benefits that could be achieved, and for the purpose of safety and everything also gets really important. So there was a clear driver, a clear outcome. So understanding again, if we're going to start using these types of different types of data and collaborate and work together, understanding that what is the motivator and what to actually get to those outcomes is really important.
I think one of the things, like I mentioned, is to harness the youth coming through and just those people who want to collaborate. That's a big thing. It's going to change. It's going to happen, and to some extent, the industry itself needs to just step back almost and let it happen. Because I've seen personally engineers come into the industry, young engineers on various large projects like Crossrail, and be kind of beaten down that thing of, we're not going to give you the tools you expect. You've come through university education, you've got access to tools, you've got access to new ideas. We're going to give you bits of paper to work with. We're going to give you no way of collaborating. And they're working around it. So giving people the tools to make this happen, I think, is one of the big changes. And the industry needs to just harness that energy.
Just pick up on a point earlier on about moving towards a service industry. One of the things that Rolls-Royce did a few years ago strategically was they used to, well they still do, but used to build and you can buy a jet engine. What they do now is you will sign a piece of paper that says you're paying for this jet engine per revolution, per air mile, per hour, whatever it is, and they will change that jet engine however many times over a 5-year period. Might change it 0 to 50 times. But you're buying the service. Are we ever going to get to a point where, using the data, we're building roads, bridges, railways, buildings that are full of data, and we are paying for those assets per day, per person, per hour, per whatever it is. That's the way that the data will then be used.
And of course includes, sorry, I know I shouldn't speak on it, but included in that is self-diagnostics in air. Allows them to have spare parts maintenance teams or whatever ready and waiting when the plane lands to...
Because you know when the maintenance is up, or the point where it's a few days before it actually breaks down. Same with buildings, roads, bridges, whatever it is. Can we move towards that?
I think there's a huge opportunity for the use of data, whether you consider it as an oil or gold or whichever asset you feel like. The thing is, I think we have the opportunity to skip past a certain technological advancement, just like the way a lot of my generation skipped past using landlines to 4G or 5G today. Construction industry today has the opportunity to actually look at where we are, Excel sheets, whatever, traditional paper methods, to actually get to a level where the world leaders are doing with artificial intelligence and machine learning and other neural network analysis. We have that opportunity. I think it's just it's up to us to actually grab that opportunity and move forward. Thank you.
I'm actually probably going to be echoing what Cameron and Shreve have said in terms of, I think as a sector we're, to use a hockey analogy, we're looking at where the puck is rather than looking where the puck's going. And we're getting very bogged down.
At least let's stop looking where the puck was.
That's true, we have moved on now. And I think I'm about to say this because of the area I work in terms of the R&D side, but there are moves forward in terms of, like we've mentioned, the Centre for Digital Build Britain are actually looking towards deconstructing BIM as like a platform and a process and all that kind of stuff, in terms of you actually then boil it down to just the data. And we shouldn't be looking at frameworks and standards, we should be looking at the way that you can start using machine learning and, as I say, just interpretation of the metadata. Because what we're looking at the moment, we look at we collect data and look at what it does. We don't collect data and look at what it means. And that's the way we need to change.
I've actually learned quite a lot sitting here, listening to it, and have gained some understanding of a number of different things. But the two things which in the back of my mind, one is, I'll come back to the point I was making a bit earlier, was the fact that having sat and seen how regulation, government control things, we need to get them to help, support, drive collaboration. Because at the moment they're part of the reason why collaboration doesn't work enough, is one thing. And the other thing, which we probably haven't spoken about generally, but it's the thing I've learned, is education. And I think I'm sitting here thinking, I'm learning a lot. I think there is a greater need for greater education within the industry about data, about the information around. Do you know what I mean? I'm just saying from a personal point of view, the little I've sort of picked up from these kind of conversations, I don't think enough of this type of discussion goes on with the right people within the industry. Do you know what I mean? I think if it did, to a point, it might influence some of their decision-making processes.
I'll go back to a couple of points I made earlier. I mean, firstly, I think it's the responsibility of people of my generation to make sure that the youth don't make the same mistakes that we did, that they are able to leverage their natural collaborative mindset, which is their culture. And I don't really agree with the oil analogy. I much prefer the slag heap analogy outside the gold mine, where there's lots and lots of data that's produced during the construction process and afterwards. And I view it like the gold mine owner. I've had some value out of it. There's a big heap of stuff outside the gates of my mine, and I'm sure there's more gold in there. And we need to work out how to mine it and sift it out. And sometimes the value isn't always apparent. And I'll give you one example that we found. It's actually some TfL data. They've made publicly available the ridership data for the underground. That's all the people who tap in with their smart card, phone, Oyster card, in and out of all of the 270 odd stations that there are every day. There's years and years and years of that data. For a bit of fun, we did some work on that with an actuary, and you can use that data to accurately tell you the state of the economy in almost real time. Because the ridership reflects, if you go back in time, it reflects what's actually happening in the economy. Once you make all the actuarial adjustments and what have you, very accurately. How cool is that? And that's just an example sometimes where the fact that you've got access to that data, that new value can be extracted from it that no one ever imagined until someone had a bright idea one morning. I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, I just got 2 points to make. One is back to collaboration. I do think that this generation, we have seen a lot of companies actually set up purely just for sharing data. And so that is a platform. So I think that if the industry wants to take seriously, we need that platform. We need something like a company to set up purely just to do that, just to get everyone together and share data. Second point is, I have actually seen a lot of positive change in the industry in the past 5-10 years, that a lot of digitalization have been used and a lot of software and new tools have been used. For example, back to what Michael said, that we are, because in my industry, we share in workload very often with Indian, with with Mexico and everything. So we all sharing the same computer model globally, and all the different center working on the same space. So and also things like back to what Tim was saying about assessments. So we are doing like risk-based inspection. So you only inspect it, just analyze all the data and according to the risk. And also, for example, training. So training operator to go to the platform, you have the 3D model, then you can walk into where you're going to work, how to operating, what you see, how you probably can't feel things, but you can actually use the tool to actually do the simulating operation training on store instead of offshore. So that saves a lot of money. So a lot of things have been done, and also in various different industries. So as construction industry-wise, building, civil, tunnel, and oil and gas, if we can all talk together and see what other tools that you are using, and if we can, among ourselves, push quite a lot of technology across to different industries. So that's just two things.
So rather than sort of repeat, I'll give an example that I've told other people already, so I'm repeating myself slightly. A fascinating conversation I had with an asset owner last year who was transforming everything they did to a very digitally focused design, construct and maintain element. They found once they started collating all their data and aggregating their data around all their assets, that they could save £20,000 per annum on toilet roll holders. When he said that to me, it was ridiculous. How is that possible? But once they looked at it in the entirety, they realised that the position of the toilet roll holder, people were using it to pick themselves up off toilet, so they were spending £200–300 per day in different places, reattaching and fixing it up. And it wasn't until someone took the time to aggregate the data, better understand their asset, that they saw what was a huge saving for minimal cost. The return on investment was huge, much larger than most things you consider. But something so small was making such a large impact because it hadn't been thought about properly, hadn't been designed properly with the outcome in mind. And data transformed the way that they looked at it and saved them a fortune.
Thanks, Ben. I guess, from our perspective then, in order to achieve our objectives, which I define for myself as more and better quality infrastructure within our affordability constraints, I think we're not going to be able to achieve that unless we unlock the benefits of data. And in order to do that, we need to collaborate. I think we've all broadly agreed. But collaboration is going to require a holistic industry change project, and so I think we need to recognise it for what it is. It is a large task in order to unlock the long-term vision and investment away from the short-term project-centric approach. But change is difficult and success is far from assured. And so those who will benefit from the success are likely to remain silent, but those who will lose from it will fight you like lions. And therefore it's going to take some significant support from government and the regulators and significant staying power from the visionaries, hopefully the customers who will step across that Rubicon first and allow the industry the time that it's going to take to mature into this collaborative way of working.
Thank you. I think just a couple of points from myself. 20 years ago this year, I gave one of the IC's named lectures in this place on the impact of IT on construction. Things were early days then. As I said, it's only a few years before that IT had emerged from the domain of the FD's office and was allowed to be used elsewhere. But a lot of the stuff I mentioned in that lecture, which were very much a prototype or on I wish lists, are now being done commonplace. Right? We're an industry that doesn't change quickly. We're frustrated bunnies here today because we want to foment change much more quickly than a big industry sector that, at the end of the day, lives and dies on risk management and safety. So I don't mean safety on sites, I mean safety to members of the public who use what we provide. By that, and it's not easy for a large beastie like that with many heads, maybe far too many heads to move. But we are moving. So part of me is saying, get real, Tim. Things are changing, but they have a natural time in our sort of sector. And part of me says, come on, let's get over that hill. We'll find other challenges over the hill, but we've got to get there. We've got to make progress. So I'm a bit in two minds on this, but it's not going to stop me trying to do whatever I can to accelerate change. Just something which may be of interest, that in the right way we are using young people in a very good way. I mean, presidents for the last 15 years, I guess now, have had half a dozen, I had 8 young engineers working with me last year. We used to call them apprentices, they now demand to be called future leaders. Which is actually what they are, because if you look at the last number of years, because of I suppose it's because of the opportunities that the ICE opens up through what they ask these people to do. They do get noticed and they do get propelled a bit. But 4 of the 8 I had last year are now advising at board level within their companies on aspects of digital transformation. And at the moment they're getting it right. So let's applaud that. Thank you very much for your comments this morning. I think we've covered in not that great a period of time. We've covered quite a wide variety of topic areas. I'm not sure we've solved anything. I'm assuming, Jodie, a note will be produced on this, right? So that will be a paper record of things that we can then perhaps take on either all together or separately or in small groups or whatever to try and continue to fight the Borg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.